We look at potential cap casualties for the Ravens in the 2022 offseason and more next year on Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And we return here with another episode of Locked On Ravens. I am your host, Kevin Oestreicher of Ravens Wire. We're here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We're free and available on all platforms. And thank you for making Locked On Ravens your first listen of the day. We're back here. It is Thursday, and we have a lot to talk about this Baltimore Ravens team as they continue to, again, chug along during this 2022 offseason. One of the quiet periods here in this mid to late February, early March kind of deal, but we are starting to see a couple of transactions go down in terms of releases and some guys signing elsewhere. But again, the official free agency period doesn't start until a couple weeks down the line here, so you're not going to see those big name guys signing. It's more just very minor moves for guys who can. Not a lot of guys can right now. They can't sign right now. So a really interesting topic that a lot of people have talked about, and we haven't really had an episode dedicated to it yet, is the cap casualty, or at least the potential cap casualties for this Ravens team, because there are a lot of them. Well, not necessarily like 10 of them, but there are a lot of guys who could save the Ravens money if they are released. So I want to talk about those guys here today. We'll do that in the second segment, talk about a couple of guys who could save the Ravens some money if they were released, and if it is a good idea to release these players or not. So that'll be our second segment. In our first segment, we'll just dive into Ravens news, notes, and quotes. The Ravens announcing a promotion and officially announcing some coaching hires. So we'll dive into that a little bit more. Then in the final segment, we'll round out the mock drafts that were under our mock draft Monday tweet from Monday, because we haven't gotten to all of those yet. So draft season is here. It is here. It is in full swing, and we'll continue to dive into those mock drafts in the final segment. So to recap, Ravens news, notes, and quotes in the first segment. We have potential cap casualties for Baltimore in the second segment. Then finally, we'll be looking at those mock drafts from Twitter. So let's dive into it here today, though. Before we do that, if you are here with us on YouTube, so you can see my background, you can see my face and everything in video form, be sure to subscribe to the channel, like the video. Your subscription and the likes, it really does help me out a ton. I want to thank everybody who's already subscribed. And if you haven't subscribed yet and you're kind of thinking about it, I highly recommend you do so. Our first goal, 1,000 subscribers. We're getting close to being just 100 away from that goal, and I'm very excited about it. So hit that subscribe button, turn the notification bell on. Speaking of notifications, turn notifications on for audio form too if you're here in audio form. Thank you for listening to Locked On Ravens, whether it's Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere you get your podcast Monday through Friday at 6 a.m. Eastern Time. Also, be sure to follow me on Twitter at KOstrecker34 and the Locked On Ravens account at Locked On Ravens. So let's dive into the content here, and starting off with the Ravens. Let's start off with the official coaching hires that the Ravens made. Now, we have talked about these hires when they were reported. We kind of dove into each guy a little bit and said that, this is their background, this is their expertise, but the Ravens just put out a graphic and announced them all. So the official announcement for Zach Orr, the inside linebackers coach, Rob Leonard, outside linebackers coach, George Godsey, the tight ends coach, Ryan Osborne, defensive quality control coach, and Mike Devlin, assistant offensive line coach. And so, again, I've talked about the Ravens, what they have done in terms of the types of coaches that they have hired. Are they all younger coaches? Are they all older type guys who have been around for a while? I've liked that the Ravens have kind of diversified that in terms of they're not only hiring these young guys and not only hiring these veteran guys. It's a very nice balance, and I think that works very well with these players, because for the Ravens, they're a team that their defense is obviously a lot older than their offense at this point, and obviously things can change with that, and we might see that defensive overhaul we talked about. But I think that for a coach, like let's an example would be Zach Orr, or as somebody who has proven himself, obviously as a player when he played for Baltimore, but then he ended up latching on with the Ravens as a coach and worked his way up, got a really rewarding job in Jacksonville. Now, that whole thing in Jacksonville didn't really work out for a number of reasons, but Orr comes back to this organization having, I think had a little success there in Jacksonville. He is, I think, really well respected within this organization. And the Ravens were, I think, ecstatic to have the opportunity to bring him back. I think Orr is very happy to be back in Baltimore. So it's those kinds of connections that you love to see where, a guy leaves for a great opportunity. The opportunity isn't necessarily what they expect. And then all of a sudden, Zach Orr pretty much essentially got a promotion because he wasn't the head inside linebackers guy. Obviously, that was Mike McDonald when Orr was in Baltimore. So now Orr takes over McDonald's spot when he was there, and the McDonald obviously now comes back and is the Ravens defensive coordinator. And the Ravens just having that reunion tour. I tweeted about it yesterday where I said, look, the Ravens can just have that reunion tour, bring back Hayden Hurst and Ryan Jensen and Jihad Ward. You can throw Mark Ingram in there if you want to. There are a couple others as well, but obviously they're probably not going to bring back every single one of those guys. But hey, there's potential for them depending on how free agency works out. But yeah, like there's Orr, the younger coach who's proven himself. Then there's Devlin, who's been around for a very long time. And again, more a well-respected coach, for different reasons. Orr has experience, but not as much experience as Devlin. I think he'll work very well hand in hand with Joe D, who is the Ravens offensive line coach at the moment. And then you have other guys too, like Rob Leonard has versatility. He's worked with obviously the outside linebackers, which is what his positional coaching is going to be in Baltimore. But also he has experience working with defensive linemen. Ryan Osborne, the quality control coach, obviously one of Mike McDonald's guys who he brought over from Michigan, and he has experience. He's one of the guys who worked with Aiden Hutchinson and David Ajabo on that defensive line. I think he's going to be great for this team. And then just what they've been able to do with the coaching hires. I mean, even George Godsey, who has that experience there. But it was really nice to see the Ravens make these moves and continue to pivot because we've seen them have to pivot time and time again because teams look to them for their coaching, or at least some of their coaching needs, where they can say, hey, look, the Ravens, they're this model organization. They do stuff the right way. They develop their players well, but they also develop their coaches, their executives. This is the thing with Joe Ortiz too, right? Ortiz is someone who is the Ravens love Joe Ortiz, and they are shocked he has not gotten an opportunity yet. And look, they'll take it, right? He's somebody who is very, very valuable, both for what he does for the organization and what he brings to the organization, just from the person that he is. They're probably really shocked that he hasn't gotten an opportunity yet. We've heard Eric DeCosta rave about him in a very positive way. And, he's gotten a lot of positive reviews from the organization. So it's not just coaches, it's not just players, it's the executives as well. And speaking of coaches, the Ravens announced that defensive line coach Anthony Weaver is no longer just defensive line coach Anthony Weaver. He's now the assistant head coach. And that's a big step up for Anthony Weaver. He is somebody, talk about respecting the organization. The Ravens have a ton of respect for him. Obviously, he was a second-round draft pick of the team back in 2002, played the first 4 years of his career with the Ravens, and ended up going to Houston for the final 3 years of his career. That career ended in 2008. He's had a couple stops in the NFL and started off in college, his coaching career in college. He's worked his way up, and obviously the highest he has been at the NFL level is with that defensive coordinator position with the Houston Texans in 2020. And that whole team was a mess. It wasn't like, oh, this is all Anthony Weaver's fault, but that whole team was a pretty big disaster. So, Weaver ends up coming to Baltimore as a defensive line coach, and the Ravens end up having the top rushing defense in the NFL. The sack numbers aren't really what you like from the defensive line in terms of interior pressure, but they did their job in the run game. And being that number one rushing defense, Anthony Weaver, I think, had a ton to do with that, working with veterans like Calais Campbell and other guys as well, like Brandon Williams. Derek Wolfe didn't really have a season, but then you have young guys, just Metabike and Broderick Washington. So it's really nice to see Weaver getting that recognition, getting that respect from the organization. They've been really good over the course of their franchise history about honoring and rewarding players, coaches, executives, whoever, who have done their job and done it well and have pretty much shown all of these reasons why, hey, I deserve this, I deserve that. The Ravens reward him with that. And Weaver is another one of those guys who, after just one season as a coach with the Ravens, has now the honor of being the assistant head coach. And it's a big responsibility, but I think Weaver's definitely up to the task. It seems like he resonated with these players, connected with these players, both from a football level and a personal level, which I think is great. And I love when players talk about that. A very recent example of that is, Rob Ryan is the inside linebackers coach, where Patrick Queen was talking about him. But then also Zach Orr, where you see on Twitter, Patrick Queen's excited and LJ Fort's excited, right? Those are great things to see. So Weaver's somebody, again, who seems to resonate with those players. And I'm excited to see how he takes his new responsibilities while also continuing to do his great work as the Ravens defensive line coach. And look, he got defensive coordinator interviews for a reason, right? He is a very talented coach. I think he deserves to be a defensive coordinator in this league, but he might just have a year or two more of like proving it. I think he's done enough. Like, honestly, I would put serious consideration in hiring Anthony Weaver. I might do it. The Broncos, they got their guy, but I don't know. I think Weaver maybe should have been their guy, but maybe the purple glasses are on. But at the same time, I don't think they are, because Weaver has had a lot of stops along the way of his coaching career, and every place he's gone to, it seems to go decently, relatively well. Obviously, again, the Houston defensive coordinator stint, the team was a mess. So I think Weaver deserves an opportunity, but for the Ravens, again, they will take it because they get a very talented coach back, and he gets to work with very talented players as well. But we'll head into our first break now. When we get back, we'll be diving in to some potential cap casualties for the Ravens as the 2022 offseason moves along. So stay tuned for that, and we'll be right back. Football might be over for the season, but basketball is in full strength for both pro and college hoops. From all the latest odds, totals, player performance props to where the next fire coach is going to land, BetOnline.net is the number one spot for all your sports betting needs. BetOnline remains the best spot for all your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. And it's not just basketball. BetOnline.net is your source for hockey, boxing, and UFC odds, right to the Olympic coverage and information. So head to the website today using mobile device to learn more about the trends and action. BetOnline, where the game starts. We're back here with our second segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher still here with you on this Thursday. And as we now dive into these Ravens potential cap casualties, I do want to say that the Ravens, their salary cap situation right now, obviously is not the best in the NFL, but it's also not the worst. There are teams out there like the Saints and the Packers who just have so much work to do. They're going to have to probably restructure, release, kick the can down the road. We talked about that yesterday. If you haven't checked out our Wednesday episode, I highly recommend it. But the Ravens, they have opportunities to work with their cap space to make the necessary room to upgrade and improve this roster. It's not like they have to do it, but I think there are moves that they probably should make to free up some cap space, whether it's 10 million, 6 million, 2 million. We'll talk about all those guys here. So let's start off with a couple of soon-to-be fourth-year guys, and Miles Boykin and Ben Powers. These are two players who could save the Ravens $2.5 million each, according to Spotrac, because as they were both in the 2019 draft, they are coming up on the last year of their rookie deal, and first-round picks are the only ones who have that fifth-year option exercise, right or not. So that would be Marquise Brown. But for Boykin and Powers, the Ravens, again, according to Spotrac, could save up to $2.5 million for each player. And that's big because, for one, Boykin, the Ravens love him on special teams. The Ravens value special teams, right? There's no secret about it. But at the same time, I think that $2.5 million, and then if you throw in Powers as well, it's $5 million that I think could be very wisely spent elsewhere. Now, for Powers, I think there's more of a possibility, more of like a trade, or you might see something like a Ben Bredesen type deal. Now, the Ravens, that deal for the Ravens was incredible, where they got that fourth round pick. Had to give up Bredesen and what was it, a sixth for the fourth? But regardless, that was a great move. I think you could see something similar for Powers, that the Ravens do want to move off of him. Powers had a very up and down year in 2021, and the Ravens have a surplus of young guards. They have Ben Cleveland. They have Tyree Phillips, who at this point to me is a guard. He's not a tackle. So if the Ravens want to add a veteran guard who can kind of swing between left and right guard, or they want to draft somebody in the 2022 draft, I think for me, it's not Cleveland who's the odd man out. It's not Phillips, because he has shown some flashes. I think it's Powers. And so if the Ravens want to say, hey, we can sign a veteran to a 1-year, $5 million deal, or put this $5 million to an extension, or this, that, and the other, or another decently big free agent signing, I think that's okay. I think that those are two moves that the Ravens should make. Now, I'm not saying that Powers isn't talented. I think he does have a lot of potential. I'm not saying Boykin isn't talented, but for the Boykin thing in particular, we've been kicking that can down the road for years now, where he's going to be this big body speedster target for Lamar Jackson. Jackson and Boykin have not been on the same page for ever. I mean, I don't think they've ever been on the same page. Boykin's had a couple of touchdowns. He's had a couple of great receptions, but The Ravens, there are too many guys in front of him now to justify playing him over James Prochet or over Devin Duvernay or even over Tylan Wallace, in my opinion, who I think is a better player at this point, which is saying something because Tylan Wallace is entering year 2 and Boykin is entering year 4. So I think for the Ravens, with that money that they could save for those two, I think they should definitely look into moving or releasing those guys to free up that salary cap space. But next, let's look at a veteran for the Ravens who I think would be tough to part with just because of how much he has meant to the franchise over the last couple of seasons. Well, couple meaning like decades, but I'm talking about Sam Cook, the punter. Now, there are a couple of great punter prospects in this draft, and the out for Sam Cook's contract is this offseason, where the Ravens could save $2.1 million by releasing him. And, that money is valuable money, but do you trust a rookie punter to come in and give you the Cook production? Cook is not quite the player he was a couple of years ago, but he's still one of the best punters in the NFL. He still provides so much value both on and off the field for the Ravens. And I think that's more of a tough decision for me. Obviously, having that money would be good, but for me, I think it's more of like a choice between, are you keeping Miles Boykin or are you keeping Sam Cook? I think that the Ravens, they love what Sam Cook brings. I would be a little shocked if they did end up deciding to move on, but then again, the Ravens moved on from Morgan Cox, and that I expected them to re-sign him, so that was a little shock to me. So maybe they shocked me again, and then the only remaining member of that wolf pack would be Justin Tucker. But I don't know. I think the Ravens are going to keep Sam Cook, even though the $2.1 million would be nice to have. I think the Ravens, they can get better salary cap relief elsewhere. Two of the guys I just talked about, as well as a couple other guys we'll talk about here in a few minutes. So I think for me, Sam Cook is safe, but you just never know with these Ravens. Let's now talk about Tavon Young. Tavon Young is a player who a lot of controversy surrounding him, it seems like, in terms of whether the Ravens should keep him or cut him. So Young, the Ravens would save around $5-6 million by releasing Tavon Young. For me, I don't think that's worth it. We'll talk about this with another player at his position in a couple minutes here. But I just think for Young, he's too valuable to what they do. I understand the injury history. He was very healthy in 2021. In my opinion, he was the team's best tackler in 2021. He provides you high-level snaps out of the slot. Are you trusting someone else to come in there for that $5-6 million and be that player that Tavon Young is? Because if Tavon Young is released, the Ravens are going to have to find a slot option. Do you trust Ardarius Washington? Are you drafting a slot corner early? Where are you going with that? You don't want to move Marlon Humphrey back there full time. So what are you doing in that situation? I think Tavon Young is well worth the cap hit that he has. I think he's well worth the salary cap savings that he would have. All that, I think Tavon Young does stay. Again, I'd be pretty shocked if Tavon Young does move on, or if the Ravens move on from Tavon Young. He's too valuable to him. And I get it. The injury history is a concern. He has missed a lot of time. He's missed a lot of seasons where he could have been contributing on the field, and that is a deal breaker for some. They just say, look, we can't trust the history. Got to get rid of him. It's tough, and I understand why it's tough, but I think you have to bank on that risk of having Young on the field because, again, if they get rid of him, I think that money just goes into another slot corner, and I don't think that the experience on the team you're losing with Young, the off-the-field camaraderie you're losing with Young, I think it is very difficult to replace that type of player. I'm not saying it's impossible if they did get rid of him, but I don't know. I value Tavon Young for this team personally. But let's now talk about that other player at his position in Marcus Peters. Now, off the bat, I'll just say Peters is probably staying with the Ravens, but there is significant salary cap savings to be had if the Ravens decided to move on from Marcus Peters. So the Ravens would save $10 million from getting rid of Peters. That's a lot of money. It's a lot of money to save. The issue with that is Peters is a very valuable player. And like I just talked about with Tavon Young, the money that the Ravens would likely save would save with Marcus Peters, that is likely being put back into another cornerback, or you're going to trust a rookie in a big situation where we have seen the Ravens, they like to stack talent on talent with positional values, right? In the draft, the Ravens had Brandon Carr and Jimmy Smith at cornerback, and Tavon Young was there too. They didn't really need a Marlon Humphrey, right? They didn't need that type of player where the Ravens had, two pretty top flight corners at the time in in Brandon Carr and Jimmy Smith. Well, the Ravens spend their first round pick on Marlon Humphrey, creating that three-headed monster that was dominant for a couple of seasons. I think that for the Ravens, they had that three-headed monster once again, plus Tavon Young when he was healthy, with Marlon Humphrey, Marcus Peters, and Jimmy Smith. Now, Smith isn't the player that he once was. Obviously, he's hitting unrestricted free agency, and he's either coming back to Baltimore or he's retiring. That's pretty much what he said. But you now have a situation where Marcus Peters is coming off of a major ACL injury. That's another thing people are worried about. Like, you can save the $10 million, invest in a healthy cornerback. Like, if this is a Marcus Peters for J.C. Jackson swap we're talking about and the Ravens draft a cornerback, then maybe you can say, all right, that might be worth it. Or if it's Peters involved in a deal for Xavier Howard or something, like, okay, maybe that's something we can talk about. But if the Ravens aren't planning on making that big splash and just like rolling with a mid-level corner instead of a Peters and then moving like $4 million of it into somebody else and signing that mid-level corner for $6 million, I don't think that's worth it whatsoever. I think Peters is going to come back with a vengeance. You know, you never know with the injuries. They can be a little bit difficult for players to recover from depending on just who they are. But I think Peters will be able to come back. And if the Ravens decide to draft a corner in a first or second round, you have that three-headed monster once again, plus Tavon Young, who I anticipate staying in Humphrey, Peters, and whoever the Ravens draft plus Tavon Young. So $10 million is a lot of money. It's someone who has been identified by a lot of people as one of the more likely players to get cut because of the salary cap savings. But we heard Eric DeCosta talk a bit about Peters and how much he loves Marcus Peters. It's a pretty ringing endorsement, a pretty public ringing endorsement of Marcus Peters. So I don't really see that happening at the end of the day, and I don't think it should happen. I think Peters is just too valuable both on and off the field with how much he has said he loves the organization, with how much his teammates love him. I just don't see many benefits to it. But then we'll move on to our final salary cap casualty, and this is the player who I think a lot of people are ready to see go, and that is Alejandro Villanueva. Now, in terms of how much money the Ravens would save if they released him, it would be $6 million by just getting rid of him. And I think that is well worth it for the Ravens to do. Villanueva, as I've said many times on this show, you can probably guess what I'm about to say if you've been listening for a while here, but he was consistently inconsistent for the Ravens in 2021. That it's just what it was. He had some great reps where he was able to do some things, and he had some not so great reps where he got beat very, very, very badly. And, unfortunately, I just don't think that the play on the field justifies that $6 million that the Ravens could have, or his $9 million cap charge, whatever it may be. I just don't think his play is worth keeping him over saving $6 million. The Ravens also have Juwan James waiting in the wings. I think they will draft a tackle very high up in the draft. I just don't see room for Villanueva on this roster, and I feel like it is probably going to happen where the Ravens do move on from Villanueva. I think that is the right move. You can save that $6 million by getting rid of Villanueva, and I think that is probably where I am looking if the Ravens are to release somebody for a decently sized chunk of salary cap relief, because the Ravens right now, they need that a little bit. They need that $6 million a little bit because the rest of the AFC, they're going to keep improving. So are the Ravens, but they're going to need a little bit more salary cap wiggle room. You can also look to extensions, restructures, etc. But just releasing Villanueva would save that money. And I think that's a well worth it way to free up some extra money for a guy that might not even be starting in 2022. And sure, you can make the argument that Villanueva could be a solid swing tackle backup. But again, I think that's Patrick McCary, who can play all five positions on the line. That's your super sub sixth offensive lineman, in my opinion. I think the need for Villanueva is pretty much extinguished at this point. Maybe the Ravens like him enough to where they keep him, but I'd be shocked if that were the case, to be completely honest. So those are some salary cap casualty potential guys for the Ravens who could be let go to free up some salary cap money. And the Ravens are going to need some of it if they want to continue to improve. But even if they don't, they still have other avenues to free up that salary cap space. Definitely. We'll head into our final break here, though. When we get back, we'll be diving into our final batch of mock drafts that we got on Monday. So stay tuned for that, and we will be right back. We're back here with our final segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Ostraker, your host. still hanging out with you here. And let's dive into the draft portion of the show. Is we're going to get into some mock draft Mondays. And we'll start off here with a mock draft from Mobius, who says can never go wrong with edge at 14, build the trenches with the next 3 picks. And so at number 14, the first round, Mobius selects George Karlaftis, the edge out of UCF. Then you have at 45, Bernhard Raimann, the offensive tackle. Zachary Carter, the interior defensive lineman at 76. Ed Ingram, an interior offensive lineman at 99. Cam Taylor-Britt, corner at 108. Chigoziem Okonwu, the tight end at 117. Tyson Anderson, the safety at 126. Caleb Evans, the corner at 138. Jerome Ford, the running back at 140. And Justin Ross, wide receiver at 194. And so, yeah, I think this is a great draft. You have a premier edge rusher who honestly might not even make it to 14 in this scenario. Then you have a more of a developmental offensive lineman in Raymond, who started as a tight end. He started as a tight end and has built his way up to being this actually really stud offensive tackle. And then you have, again, interior defensive lineman, interior offensive lineman. So building those trenches for sure with those first 4 picks. And then you have a corner, a solid tight end for sure, safety, corner, running back, wide receiver. Justin Ross is a steal, by the way. I think if I was on board with the Ravens drafting a late round wide receiver, which at this point I'm not necessarily the biggest fan of that, it would definitely be a guy like Justin Ross, who has all the intangibles, could be somebody who makes a huge, huge impact at the NFL level. And so I like this one a lot because it, again, is a needs-based draft, but there's not necessarily a forced pick here. The Ravens can go with some best player available in this where, if Karlaftis does fall to 14, the Ravens can take him and then still have options at 45 with an offensive tackle like that. And it's, again, best players, but they're also filling needs, and it's that balance for the Ravens, which I think is really, really liked by this organization. Next, we'll get into a mock draft by Matthew Seamus, who has the Ravens taking Jermaine Johnson at pick number 14. Travis Jones, there's the guy Travis Jones again at pick number 46. Kellen Diesch, tackle out of Arizona State at 78. Marcus Jones, corner from Houston at 102. Hassan Haskins, Michigan running back at 107. Tyler Smith, tackle at 116. Jack Sanborn, linebacker at 125. Luke Fortner, Kentucky center at 140. Then Mario Goodrich, cornerback at 141. Jake Ferguson, tight end at 193. And Ryan Stonehouse, the punter, at 231. Yeah, another punter here taken, and that's what we kind of talked about in the second segment with Sam Cook in terms of, will Sam Cook be released? We don't know, but yeah, it looks like in this scenario, I'm not taking a punter in the draft unless Sam Cook is not in Baltimore anymore. So it looks like Matthew here has the Ravens getting rid of Sam Cook. But Jermaine Johnson, very high riser in this draft. He is somebody who does it all, can play the run, can rush the passer very good. Travis Jones has been in like four or five mock drafts, 4 out of the last 5 at least, for the Locked On Ravens mock draft. So he's somebody who is a very popular pick and a very good player as well. Then you have 2 tackles taken in this draft, 2 corners taken in this draft. You have a center who's a kind of a later round center with Luke Fortner. That's a 4th round pick. Tight end there as well. We talked about that with the last mock draft as well. So again, Jermaine Johnson is an edge guy who you can say, is edge the biggest need right now in the Ravens? No, it's not. But it is a need. And with some of the positions being a bit deeper this season than definitely last year, at least, the Ravens can afford to make a best player available pick and stack a position and then get into the 2nd round or trade up or do whatever and say, hey, look, we have a decent option here for us. Let's take this guy. He can be the centerpiece of this position or that position. So the Ravens have opportunities to improve here. And for Baltimore, the tackle's not taken until the 3rd round in this one. I think that's okay. Although after the first 7, 8, 9 guys, there is a pretty big drop off in terms of talent. So the Ravens do have to be wary of that because I think the draft is the most realistic option for the Ravens to secure a top flight tackle, because in free agency, the guys are just going to be too expensive for them. They're not going to have enough money. Orlando Brown, obviously, former Raven there, Teron Armstead, those are guys who are just going to be too much money for the Ravens. So if they want that top flight tackle, a rookie deal guy, I think, is the best option for them. And then finally here, let's get into a mock draft from Barrett King, 89, who has the Ravens taking Tyler Linderbaum, the Obviously, center out of Iowa at number 14, to Marvin Leal, interior defensive lineman at 45. Drake Jackson, edge at 76. You have Jeremy Rucker, tight end at 99. Martin Emerson, the corner at 108. Nick Cross, the safety at 117. Brandon Smith, linebacker at 126. Damian Pierce, running back at 138. Kellen Deesh, offensive tackle at 140. And Neil Farrell Jr., interior defensive lineman at 194. This is a good draft. I like this one a lot. Building the trenches early with Linderbaum and Leal. I love the Leal pick for sure. He's somebody who I would not expect to be available at 45. I think he'll go a little earlier than that. So if he is, I think that's a home run pick for them, especially with the need on the defensive line. Drake Jackson, the edge, I think is another good pick there. Again, kind of like a steal type guy. Jeremy Rucker, same thing. Steal. I mean, all these players, the first 4 picks from me are guys who I think are going a little earlier than these selected draft spots. Not Linderbaum. I think the sweet spot for Linderbaum is probably right around that 14th pick in terms of how early he could go. But I love Linderbaum. I love Leal, Jackson, Rucker. Those guys are all great. I think Nick Cross is great. Damian Pierce is a good running back who I think would be a nice third down back if the Ravens don't decide to retain Devonta Freeman. So this is a great draft. 2 studs in the first 2 rounds. You get quality depth and another example of best player available translating into positions of need, where you don't have to force the best player available, where it's, the best player available on the board is a running back. Are we going to take a running back at 14? The Ravens aren't going to look at themselves and say, we need a running back at 14 right now. That's not what they do. But best player available at edge, best player available at center, tackle, corner, maybe even safety, etc. Those are all positions of need that you can say, hey, this guy's the best player on our board. We're going to take him, and it fills that need. So I think the Ravens could look at that mindset. So a bunch of good mock drafts here, and we'll do this again on next Monday, obviously, with our next mock draft. And Monday, we'll talk about the next mock draft I do, as well as get into your mock drafts as well. But that's all I have for you here today on Locked On Ravens. Thank you so much for tuning in. When we get back in tomorrow, we'll be rounding out the week with more Ravens talk, so stay tuned for that, and I will see you tomorrow.